Judy Alexander is the author of Desert Medicine, a novel published by Kriegel Publications. Although Judy's had many articles published previously, this is her first novel. We are fortunate to have the author with us today to answer a few questions about her book and to read aloud a section of Desert Medicine. Judy, could you start out by telling us a little bit about the book, about the story, a little bit of a synopsis?
Desert Medicine is a novel about a young woman, Laurel, who's a mother of twins, and she's going through a divorce. And because of that, she's lost her sense of family. But she's refusing to feel sorry for herself and instead volunteers to help an older woman who has cancer. And in the course of the novel, which is told in two alternating points of view, Laurel, the younger woman, and Rhoda, the older woman, we learn that Rhoda, too, has struggled her whole life to find a sense of family, beginning in Panhandle, Texas, where she was an abused girl who was then sent to Calexico, California, which is a border town, and that's where her aunt ran a home hospital. I think it might help if I read a couple pages from Laurel's point of view in my novel, Desert Medicine. This is from Chapter 2, entitled Church Recovery. During her lunch hour, Laurel headed for the nearest church. She didn't explain anything to Alfonso or Diego, although they were sure to marvel that she was leaving. She usually worked right through lunch. The minister, who called himself Pastor Mark, had agreed to meet with her, even though she hadn't phoned ahead for an appointment. She'd expected a balding, paunchy man, like the spiritual leader at her childhood church. This man, with a full head of hair and a T-shirt, couldn't be much older than Laurel. He sat behind his desk, while Laurel sat in a chair facing him. She left her baseball cap on. "I thought you'd be older." He smiled. "Like Friar Tuck, with a bald head and a little fringe on the sides?" Laurel laughed nervously. "I grew up in a church. I know better." "How can I help you?" "I know who you are. You're the guy who jogs past the nursery every day. I see you all the time." "You work there? I always wanted to look inside." "What are you doing, running from your problems?" "Some days. Mostly I just need the exercise." He didn't act offended. Laurel was embarrassing herself with her own brashness. "I'm sorry, I'm nervous. It's been so long since I've talked to a pastor." "That's okay." "It's not me, it's my kids, Marty and Mitchell. They're 5-year-old twins." "Okay then. How can I help them?" "I was brought up in the church, but I don't really believe all that stuff. Does that offend you?" "You're not shocking me." "Could you stand up?" "What?" Since he remained seated, Laurel stood up and peered over his desk. As she'd suspected, he was wearing shorts. "Oh my gosh, I've interrupted your jog." Pastor Mark leaned back in his chair. "I'm not in a hurry. I always dress this way, except Sundays and for funerals and weddings. I can go put on a suit if that makes you more comfortable." Laurel laughed nervously again. She was mortified by her own self-conscious behavior. "I'm not always so hyperactive." She sat back down. She laughed again, for no reason, and then was frightened to realize that she was about to cry. She looked down at her lap and rubbed her palms up and down her jeaned legs until she felt warmth from the friction. "Like I said, I work next door, and I saw your sign, His Love Community Church, and I thought, that's what my kids need. They could use some stability in their lives, some hope." Has something triggered their insecurity? Laurel didn't dare to look up, for fear any sympathy on his face would make her feel sorry for herself. "My marriage is in transition." She heard his chair creak as he leaned forward. "That's really rough. I've been through that." She looked at him. "I thought pastors were immune to divorce." "So did I."
Judy, I understand that you are not a full-time writer. When did you find time to write this novel?
Yes, that's true. I have a full life. I'm a mother. I have 2 sons. They're older now. One is 21 and one's 14. But when I started writing, seriously started writing fiction writing 16 years ago, they were young boys. And on top of that, I have a job, and I have a husband, and I have hobbies, and I'm active in church. So there really is little time to write. But what's worked for me has been spending a couple hours early mornings writing. And when the boys were young, I actually have a shed out in the yard, and I would go out there and write. Now that they're older and I can leave them, then I actually leave the house and go to a coffee shop, and I write there.
I understand that getting Desert Medicine published has been a long journey for you. What has kept you going?
It has been a long journey, and I didn't realize when I started how long it would take. I thought that if you had talent and if you applied hard work, that you wrote a novel and then you got published. And I didn't think that would take more than 5 years on the outside. And it's been more than 16 years. So in the meantime, I continued to take community college courses where I learned more about the art of writing and more about the craft. I also attended writers' conferences, which was a good place to meet fellow writers and also people within the industry, agents and editors. And I did experience periods of self-doubt. But about the time I would think maybe now is the time to quit, then someone at church would come up and say, "How are you doing with your writing?" And I'd feel like I didn't have the luxury to quit.
What part did your faith play in the writing of this book?
Well, Jan Karon, who writes the Mitford novels, said, and I wrote this down, "My faith can't be separated from my work. Even if I never mention the name of Jesus Christ, I can't hide from you who I am and what I'm about as an author." And I think that's true for me. Although I never set out to be a Christian author, I wanted to be a literary writer, which is considered a good writer. I found that my faith was working its way into my writing. And as Jan Karon says, if you are a good writer and you're honest about your life and honest about your emotions, then you're going to be honest about your spirituality as well. Fortunately, about 10 years ago, I attended the Festival of Faith and Writing in Grand Rapids, Michigan at Calvin College. Again, a writers' conference. But that was a gathering of about, I'm guessing, 500 people who were similar to me, who were also striving to be literary writers and also happened to be Christians. And when I discovered that group, that really reinforced what I was doing and gave me a sense that, indeed, if I kept writing, that I would get published, that there was a market and there were others like me that were paving the way.